What's the craziest way you've ever caught someone in a lie? My brother Theo had always been the golden child. Straight A's, Harvard MBA, married his college sweetheart Vivian, and landed a six-figure job at Dad's investment firm before he turned 25. Meanwhile, I was the family disappointment. Dropped out of college, worked dead-end jobs, and lived in a studio apartment above a pizza shop. Every family gathering was the same routine. Dad would beam about Theo's latest promotion, while I got the sympathetic head tilts and questions about when I'd get my life together. Mom would show everyone pictures of Theo and Vivian's perfect suburban house, their European vacations, their charity galas. Your brother donated another $50,000 to the Children's Hospital, Dad announced at Easter dinner. They're naming a wing after him. I smiled and nodded, swallowing my jealousy with the dry turkey. Everything changed when Dad had his heart attack. While he was recovering, Mom asked me to handle his business mail since Theo was too busy with important deals. I'd been unemployed for 3 months, so I had nothing but time. That's when I found the bank statements. Dad's personal account showed monthly transfers of $15,000 to an account I didn't recognize. For 18 months, I cross-referenced the dates with my mental calendar of Theo's achievements. The charity donations, the house down payment, the luxury car, everything lined up perfectly with these mysterious transfers. My brother wasn't successful. He was stealing from our father. I could have confronted him directly, but Theo was brilliant at talking his way out of trouble. I needed proof even he couldn't explain away. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of bank transfers, copies of Dad's statements, a timeline of Theo's sudden wealth. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. Theo would claim Dad had loaned him the money, or that it was an early inheritance, or some other plausible lie. I needed him to confess. That's when I remembered the nanny cam. 2 years ago, Dad had installed hidden cameras throughout the house after a break-in in their neighborhood. Mom hated them, so Dad told her he'd removed them, but I knew he'd just hidden them better. Dad was paranoid about security. He'd never actually disconnect them. I spent a week learning the system while house-sitting during their anniversary trip. The cameras were motion-activated and stored everything in a cloud server Dad thought only he knew about. All I had to do was get Theo to confess on camera. I called him and used the magic words that always worked. Dad wants to see you. It's urgent. Theo arrived within an hour, looking panicked. I met him at the door with tears in my eyes. The doctors found something during Dad's follow-up, I said. They want to run more tests, but I let my voice break. They think it might be serious. Theo's face went white. How serious? They're not sure he'll make it through another surgery. He's been asking for you. I led him upstairs to Dad's office, knowing the camera there had the best audio quality. Dad's been worried about his legacy, I continued, about making sure his affairs are in order. He keeps talking about the business, about money he can't account for. Theo stiffened. What kind of money? I don't know, but he's getting suspicious. He asked me to go through his bank statements with him tomorrow. The change in Theo was instant. His shoulders sagged and he collapsed into Dad's chair. Oh God, he whispered. This is all my fault. I sat down across from him, fighting to keep my expression concerned rather than triumphant. What's your fault? Theo buried his face in his hands. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just borrowing a few thousand when Vivian was pregnant and I needed money for the hospital bills. I always planned to pay it back. Borrowing from who? Dad's accounts. I have access to everything through the firm. I thought I'd replace it before anyone noticed, but then Vivian wanted the house, and her parents were asking why we couldn't afford a decent neighborhood. I kept taking more. My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady. How much? Over the past 18 months, he looked up with red-rimmed eyes. About $270,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I'd known it was bad, but hearing the number made it real. Theo, that's not borrowing, that's stealing. I know. He stood up and started pacing. But everything I've done has been for the family image. Do you think Dad would be proud of his Harvard son living in a one-bedroom apartment? Do you think Mom would brag about me working at some startup for $40,000 a year? So you've been lying about your job too? I've been lying about everything. The words poured out like he'd been holding them back for years. The firm never hired me. Dad pulled strings to get me the interview, but they rejected me. I've been working as a financial advisor at a small firm downtown. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. The car is leased. The charity donations are fake. I just photoshopped the receipts. I stared at him in shock. Even the Children's Hospital wing? Especially that. Dad was so proud when I told him. How could I take that away from him? By not lying in the first place? Theo laughed bitterly. Easy for you to say. You never had expectations to live up to. Everyone already thinks you're a failure. The words stung, but I pushed through. What were you planning to do when Dad found out? I don't know. Maybe I could have replaced some of it over time. Maybe I could have convinced him it was an investment he forgot about. I'm good at making people believe what they want to hear. Not this time. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed him the bank statements I'd photographed. Dad knows money is missing. He asked me to investigate. Theo's face went from pale to gray. You've seen the statements? All of them. Every transfer, every date. I know about the fake account you set up. I know about the forged business documents. I know everything. How long have you known? 2 weeks. And you didn't say anything? I wanted to hear it from you first. Theo slumped back into the chair. Are you going to tell him? I already have. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Theo stared at me with growing horror. What do you mean you already have? Dad's not having surgery tomorrow. He's not even sick. That was a lie to get you here. I don't understand. I stood up and walked to Dad's bookshelf, running my finger along the spine of his old law books. You're not the only one who's good at making people believe what they want to hear. Dad knows? Everything. He's known for 3 days. Where is he? Downstairs, with Mom and Vivian and a federal investigator. Theo shot to his feet. A federal investigator? Dad's company handles government contracts. Stealing from him is technically stealing from federal accounts. That makes it a federal crime. The blood drained from Theo's face completely. He grabbed the edge of Dad's desk to steady himself. This isn't real. You're lying. Am I? That's when we heard footsteps on the stairs. Dad appeared in the doorway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Behind him was a woman in a dark suit carrying a briefcase. Hello, son, Dad said quietly. Theo looked between us desperately. Dad, I can explain. You already did. Dad gestured to a small device on his bookshelf that I'd never noticed before. I heard everything. That's been recording? For the past 20 minutes. Agent Rodriguez has been listening from downstairs. The woman stepped forward. Theodore Mitchell, you're under arrest for wire fraud, theft of federal funds, and money laundering. Money laundering? The fake account, the false business records, the charity receipt forgeries. You created an elaborate system to hide stolen funds. That's textbook money laundering. As Agent Rodriguez read Theo his rights, he kept looking at me with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. How could you do this to me? He whispered. I'm your brother. My brother wouldn't have stolen from his own father, I replied. My brother wouldn't have built his entire life on lies. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Vivian's family, the expectations. Everyone faces pressure, Theo. Most people don't become criminals. Dad stepped between us. That's enough, both of you. But as they led Theo away in handcuffs, he turned back to me one last time. You think you've won something here? You think this makes you the good son? You're still a failure. This doesn't change who you are. No, I said, watching them put him in the back of an unmarked car. But it changes who you are. After they left, Dad and I sat in his office in silence. The hidden camera was still recording, a small red light blinking in the corner. How long have you known? I asked. About the cameras? Since I installed them. About the money? Since last month when the bank called about unusual activity. Why didn't you confront him directly? Dad sighed and looked out the window where Theo's car was still parked in the driveway. Because I hoped I was wrong. I hoped my son wasn't capable of this. Are you disappointed in me? For setting him up? No, you did what I couldn't. You got the truth. Was any of this legal? The recording, the setup? One-party consent state. You were aware of the recording, so it's admissible. Agent Rodriguez has been investigating financial irregularities at my firm for months. She was thrilled when I called her. I nodded, processing everything. What happens now? Now your brother faces federal charges. The house will be seized, the car repossessed. Vivian's already filed for divorce. Apparently she's known about his real job for months and was planning to leave anyway. And the family? Dad looked older than his 72 years. Your mother's devastated. She's blaming herself for pushing him to be successful. I'm questioning every parenting decision I ever made. This isn't your fault, isn't it? Maybe if I hadn't put so much pressure on both of you to maintain the family image. Dad, I had the same pressure and I never stole anything. No, you just gave up. The words hung in the air between us. He was right. When faced with impossible expectations, Theo had chosen to lie and steal. I had chosen to quit trying altogether, but that conversation would have to wait. Downstairs, I could hear Mom crying and Vivian's voice getting progressively louder as the reality of her situation sank in. I should go check on them, I said. Dad nodded. I'll be down in a minute. I need to make some calls. Downstairs, the scene was chaos. Mom sat on the couch with tissues scattered around her like snow, while Vivian paced the living room on her phone with what sounded like a lawyer. No, you don't understand, Vivian was saying. I had no idea. I thought the money was legitimate. I signed the mortgage papers because my husband told me we could afford it. She spotted me and hung up quickly. Did you know? About what specifically? Any of it. The job, the money, the house we can't afford. I sat down next to Mom and put my arm around her shoulders. I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't know the details until recently. How recently? 2 weeks. Vivian's eyes flashed with anger. 2 weeks? And you didn't think to warn me? I needed to be sure, and I needed evidence. Evidence? He's my husband. Was my husband. God, I don't even know what to call him now. Mom looked up through her tears. What's going to happen to the baby? We all froze. In the chaos, I'd forgotten that Vivian was 4 months pregnant. What baby? I asked. Vivian's hand went instinctively to her stomach. I found out last week. I haven't told anyone yet. Mom burst into fresh tears. Oh, sweetie, what are you going to do? I don't know. The house is going to be seized. My car was in Theo's name, so that's probably gone too. I have about $3,000 in my personal account and a job that pays $35,000 a year. I looked at this woman who'd been part of our family for 5 years, who was carrying my niece or nephew, who was about to lose everything because of my brother's choices. You can stay here, I heard myself saying, until you figure things out. Mom nodded eagerly. Of course, we have plenty of room. I can't accept charity, Vivian said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's not charity, it's family, Mom said firmly. That baby is going to be our grandchild, no matter what Theo has done. Vivian sat down heavily in Dad's armchair. How did I not see it? Looking back, there were so many signs. The way he'd get nervous when bills came. The time I found a bank statement with a different account number and he said it was a work thing. The way he always paid for everything in cash. He was good at hiding it, I said. He fooled all of us. But you figured it out. Only because I was looking at Dad's finances, not Theo's. If I'd been looking at Theo directly, he probably would have found a way to explain it away. Dad appeared in the doorway, his face grim. I just got off the phone with Agent Rodriguez. Theo's being held without bail. The arraignment is scheduled for Friday. Without bail? Mom asked. Flight risk. He has access to potentially more stolen funds, and his lies show a pattern of deception. The judge won't take any chances. Vivian laughed bitterly. Access to more stolen funds? I can barely afford groceries. The investigation is ongoing, Dad said. There may be other accounts, other victims. The firm is being audited completely. That's when it hit me. Dad, could this destroy your business? It might. If clients lose confidence, if the government contracts get pulled, he shrugged. I built it once. I can build it again if I have to. But you're 72 years old, and you're 28. Maybe it's time for a new generation to take over. I laughed despite everything. Dad, I'm the son who dropped out of college and lived above a pizza shop. Theo was supposed to be your successor. Theo was supposed to be a lot of things. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Theo's deception became clear. The FBI's investigation revealed that he'd been running his scheme for longer than even he had admitted. The $270,000 he confessed to was just the beginning. In total, Theo had stolen over $450,000 from Dad's personal and business accounts. He'd also defrauded 3 clients at his real job, convincing them to invest in fake opportunities and pocketing their money. One of those clients was an elderly widow who'd trusted him with her late husband's life insurance payout. The charity fraud was perhaps the most elaborate part. Theo had created an entire fake charity organization, complete with a website, brochures, and false testimonials. He'd used it to not only steal money, but also to enhance his reputation in the community. The Children's Hospital had never heard of him, but the discovery that shocked me most came from Vivian herself. 3 weeks after Theo's arrest, she was going through boxes of his personal papers that the FBI had returned after copying everything. That's when she found the insurance policy. He took out a life insurance policy on your father, she told me, her voice shaking as she held the document. $2 million. He bought it 6 months ago. We were sitting in Dad's kitchen, Mom having gone to bed early as she'd been doing since the arrest. Dad was in his office, dealing with the endless paperwork that came with being the victim of a federal crime. A life insurance policy? Look at the beneficiary. I read the document. The beneficiary was listed as Theodore Mitchell, in trust for family medical expenses. This doesn't make sense, I said. You can't just take out a life insurance policy on someone without their knowledge. You can if you have power of attorney for financial matters. My blood went cold. Theo has power of attorney? Had. Dad revoked it yesterday. But when he was in the hospital after his heart attack, he gave Theo power of attorney in case something happened and he couldn't make decisions. I stared at the policy, a terrible thought forming in my mind. Vivian, when exactly did Theo start stealing larger amounts? She pulled out the timeline I'd created weeks earlier. Here, it escalated significantly about 4 months ago. And when did Dad have his heart attack? 5 months ago. The timeline was chilling. Theo had used Dad's medical emergency to gain power of attorney. Then he'd used that power to take out a massive life insurance policy. Then he'd started stealing larger amounts, perhaps as a way to fund the premiums, or perhaps because he knew his time was running out. Do you think he was planning to... Vivian couldn't finish the sentence. I don't know, but we need to tell Agent Rodriguez about this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dad's recovery, about how Theo had been so attentive, visiting every day, bringing special meals, insisting that Dad not push himself too hard. Had those visits been out of love, or had Theo been monitoring Dad's health for more sinister reasons? The next morning, Agent Rodriguez came to the house to collect the insurance policy. She listened to our concerns with a poker face that revealed nothing. We'll investigate this thoroughly, she said. In the meantime, your father should have a complete medical examination. If there's any indication of poisoning or other interference, we need to know immediately. Poisoning? Mom whispered. You think Theo might have been poisoning his father? I think we need to rule out every possibility, Mrs. Mitchell. Your son has shown a pattern of escalating criminal behavior. We can't assume we've seen the worst of it. Dad took the news with surprising calm. I've been feeling unusually tired lately, he admitted. And I've had some digestive issues that the doctors couldn't explain. I assumed it was stress from the heart attack recovery. We'll have you tested for everything, Agent Rodriguez said. Heavy metals, prescription drugs, anything that could cause chronic fatigue or digestive problems. The results came back a week later. Dad had elevated levels of digoxin in his system, a heart medication that in high doses could cause exactly the symptoms he'd been experiencing. More importantly, it wasn't a medication he'd been prescribed. How long has this been going on? Dr. Patel asked as she reviewed the test results. I started feeling off about 3 months ago, Dad said, right around the time I was cleared to return to normal activities. 3 months ago, right when Theo's visits had become more frequent, when he'd started bringing Dad special smoothies to help with recovery. Agent Rodriguez was called immediately. Within hours, she had a warrant to search Theo's belongings at the county jail. In his personal effects, they found a small vial of digoxin tablets hidden inside a contact lens case. That's when the charges were upgraded to attempted murder. The arraignment for the new charges was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The courthouse was packed with reporters who'd gotten wind of the story. The local news had picked up on the angle of a Harvard-educated golden boy who tried to kill his father for insurance money. Theo looked different in his orange jumpsuit, thinner, older, with a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and harsh reality. When they read the attempted murder charge, he started crying. I never meant to hurt him, he said to his lawyer, loudly enough for the gallery to hear. I just wanted him to stay weak enough that he wouldn't notice the money missing. His lawyer immediately tried to silence him, but the damage was done. That statement, made in open court, became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. After the hearing, Mom and I sat in the courthouse parking lot, neither of us ready to go home. How did I raise a child capable of this? She asked. You didn't, I said. You raised 2 children. One turned out to be a criminal. The other turned out to be the person who stopped him. But what if I'd done things differently? What if I hadn't pushed him so hard to succeed? What if I'd paid more attention to you instead of always focusing on his achievements? Mom, you can't blame yourself for Theo's choices, and you can't change the past, but you can learn from it. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. What do you mean? You still have one son, and that son could use a mother who believes in him, not despite his failures, but because of how he handles them. Over the following months, as Theo's case made its way through the federal court system, our family slowly began to rebuild itself. Dad's health improved dramatically once the digoxin was out of his system. The doctors said that if Theo had continued the poisoning for much longer, it could have caused permanent heart damage or death. Vivian gave birth to a daughter, Charlotte, in the spring. Dad and Mom fell in love with their granddaughter immediately, and Vivian decided to stay in the family home indefinitely. She'd found a better job as a paralegal at a law firm downtown, and having built-in babysitters allowed her to work and attend law school part-time. The business survived, though barely. Several clients did pull their contracts initially, but Dad's reputation for honesty over 40 years in business eventually won out. The government contracts were suspended during the investigation, but were restored once it was clear that Dad had been a victim, not a perpetrator. I started working at the firm officially, beginning in the mailroom and learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous work, but for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something rather than just surviving. The most difficult part was dealing with the media attention. The story had everything reporters loved: family betrayal, attempted murder, stolen money, and a dramatic arrest. For months, we couldn't go to the grocery store without someone recognizing us. How does it feel to be the son who saved his father's life? One reporter asked me outside the courthouse. Like I did what anyone would do, I answered. I told the truth, but privately, I struggled with the hero narrative that the media had constructed around me. Yes, I'd exposed Theo's crimes, but my motivations hadn't been entirely pure. Part of me had enjoyed watching my perfect brother fall from grace. Part of me had relished being the good son for once. I started seeing a therapist to work through these feelings, something that would have been unthinkable in our family before Theo's arrest. Now seeking help was seen as a sign of strength rather than weakness. Dr. Brennan helped me understand that complex motivations didn't invalidate good actions. You can be jealous of your brother and still do the right thing, she said. You can enjoy his downfall and still feel bad about the pain it caused your family. Human emotions aren't simple or pure. Theo's trial began 18 months after his arrest. By then, Charlotte was walking and calling me uncle in a way that melted my heart every time. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had the financial records, the recorded confession, the insurance policy, the evidence of poisoning, and Theo's own statement in court about wanting to keep Dad weak. Theo's defense team tried to argue that he'd suffered a mental breakdown due to financial pressure, but the evidence of premeditation was too strong. The life insurance policy alone showed that he'd been planning for Dad's death, not just trying to steal money impulsively. I testified on the 3rd day of the trial. Walking into that courtroom and seeing Theo sitting at the defendant's table, wearing a suit that made him look like the successful businessman he'd pretended to be, was surreal. The prosecutor asked me to walk through the timeline of my investigation, from finding the bank statements to setting up the recorded confession. Theo's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, suggesting that I'd framed my brother out of jealousy. Isn't it true that you've always resented your brother's success? The defense attorney asked. Yes, I said. But that doesn't change the fact that he was stealing from our father and slowly poisoning him. How do we know you didn't plant that evidence? You had access to your father's house, you knew about the security cameras. Objection, the prosecutor said. Speculation, sustained, but the damage was already done. The defense had planted the seed of doubt, suggesting that maybe I was the real criminal, that maybe I'd framed my innocent brother. That doubt was eliminated when the prosecution called their surprise witness, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the elderly widow Theo had defrauded at his real job. Mrs. Hartwell was 83 years old, sharp as a tack, and angrier than anyone I'd ever seen. She took the stand wearing her late husband's Purple Heart pin and carrying a folder of documents. That man, she said, pointing directly at Theo, convinced me to invest my husband's life insurance money in what he said was a guaranteed return fund for veterans' families. He had brochures, testimonials, even a fake website. I gave him $180,000. Every penny we'd saved for 40 years of marriage. Her voice shook with rage. When I started asking questions about the returns, he told me the fund was having temporary difficulties, but that my money was safe. He kept reassuring me, kept lying to my face, while he was using my husband's sacrifice to fund his fake lifestyle. The defense attorney tried to cross-examine her, but Mrs. Hartwell was having none of it. Don't you dare try to confuse me, young man, she snapped. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I know what theft looks like, and I know what a liar looks like. Your client is both. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, theft of federal funds, money laundering, attempted murder, and elder abuse. At sentencing, Theo was given the opportunity to make a statement. He stood up slowly, looking at our family in the gallery. I want to apologize to my father for betraying his trust and attempting to harm him. I want to apologize to my wife, ex-wife, for destroying our marriage and our future. I want to apologize to Mrs. Hartwell for stealing her husband's legacy. And I want to apologize to my brother for putting him in a position where he had to choose between family loyalty and doing the right thing. He paused, wiping his eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want everyone to know that my actions were mine alone. No one else in my family knew what I was doing or enabled me in any way. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 8 years. He would also have to pay full restitution to all victims, including Mrs. Hartwell, Dad, and the other clients he'd defrauded. As they led him away, Theo looked at me one last time. This time, there was no anger in his eyes, just profound sadness and what might have been regret. That night, our family gathered at Dad's house for the first time since Theo's arrest, without the shadow of legal proceedings hanging over us. Charlotte was playing with blocks on the living room floor, while Vivian studied for her law school exams at the kitchen table. What happens now? Mom asked. Now we move forward, Dad said. We build something better. I want to make some changes at the firm, I said. Implement better oversight, more transparency. Make sure something like this can never happen again. What kind of changes? Multiple approvals for large transactions, regular audits by outside firms, maybe even a whistleblower program for employees who notice irregularities. Dad nodded. That's good thinking. What else? I want to establish a fund for fraud victims. Start with Mrs. Hartwell. Even after restitution, she's going to struggle financially. And I want us to partner with organizations that help families dealing with white-collar crime. You want to turn our family's tragedy into a way to help others? I want to make sure some good comes from all this pain. Mom smiled through her tears. I think that's what your brother should have been, if he'd made different choices. 3 years later, the Theodore Mitchell Victim Recovery Fund had helped over 200 families affected by financial fraud. The irony of naming it after Theo wasn't lost on any of us, but Dad insisted. His name should be associated with helping people, not just hurting them, he said. I'd been running the firm for a year by then, having worked my way up from the mailroom to management. It wasn't the path anyone had expected for me, but it was mine, earned through honesty and hard work rather than deception and theft. Vivian had passed the bar exam and was working as a prosecutor specializing in white-collar crime. I understand what it feels like to be a victim, she told the local newspaper, and I understand how someone can be fooled by people they trust. It makes me a better advocate for the people who've been hurt. Charlotte was 3 years old and had never met her father. We'd all agreed that when she was old enough to ask questions, we'd tell her the truth in age-appropriate terms. For now, she was surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. Mom had started a support group for family members of white-collar criminals. The shame is terrible, she told me. You feel responsible even when you know logically that you're not. People need to know they're not alone. Dad had officially retired and spent his time volunteering at the Literacy Center with Mom and teaching a business ethics course at the local community college. I want to make sure the next generation understands that success without integrity isn't really success at all, he said. And Theo? I'd finally visited him the previous month. The prison was a stark, gray place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Theo looked older than his 31 years, with gray threading through his hair and lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Thank you for coming, he said quietly, as we sat across from each other at a metal table. How are you doing? I'm alive. I'm safe. I'm getting the mental health treatment I should have gotten years ago. He paused. I'm learning to live with what I've done. Do you regret it? Every day. But not just because I got caught. I regret the person I became. I regret the pain I caused. I regret the life I threw away for money and status that weren't even real. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. How's Charlotte? She's amazing. Smart, funny, stubborn like her mother. Will you tell her about me someday? When she's ready to understand, yes. What will you say? I thought about it for a long moment. I'll tell her that her father made terrible choices that hurt a lot of people, including himself. But I'll also tell her that those choices don't define her and that the rest of us love her enough to make up for his absence. Theo nodded, tears in his eyes. That's more than I deserve. It's not about what you deserve. It's about what she deserves. As I drove home from the prison, I thought about the question that had started this whole story. What's the craziest way you've ever caught someone in a lie? The answer, I realized, wasn't really about hidden cameras or elaborate setups or federal investigations. It wasn't even about the lies themselves. It was about understanding that the biggest lies aren't the ones people tell us. They're the ones people tell themselves. Theo had lied to himself about what constituted success, about what our family expected from him, about what would make him happy. Those self-deceptions had led to increasingly desperate attempts to maintain an image that was never real to begin with. But I'd been lying to myself too. I'd told myself that I was a failure, that I didn't matter, that I could never live up to expectations. Those lies had kept me from even trying to build a meaningful life. The craziest way to catch someone in a lie isn't through surveillance or trickery. It's by creating an environment where telling the truth feels safer than continuing the deception. And sometimes, the most important person to catch in a lie is yourself. 5 years after Theo's arrest, I received a letter from him. In it, he told me he'd been accepted into a prison education program and was working toward a degree in social work. He wanted to counsel other inmates about the dangers of white-collar crime and addiction to status. I'll never be able to undo what I did, he wrote, but maybe I can help someone else before they make the same mistakes. At the bottom of the letter, he'd included a small drawing that Charlotte had made in preschool, a stick figure family with uncle, grandpa, grandma, mommy, and me labeled under each figure. At the very edge of the paper, barely visible, was another stick figure with Daddy written underneath in Charlotte's shaky handwriting. She'd included him in her family picture even though she'd never met him. That night, I sat down and wrote him back for the first time since his sentencing. "Dear Theo," I began. "Charlotte's teacher says she has a gift for seeing the good in people even when it's hidden. Maybe she gets that from the best parts of you that still exist somewhere inside the person you used to be. Because the craziest thing about catching someone in a lie isn't exposing their deception. It's believing that the truth, no matter how painful, can still lead to redemption. Even when that someone is your brother. Even when that lie almost destroyed your family. Even when forgiveness feels impossible. Hope has a way of surviving in the smallest, most unexpected places. Like a child's drawing that includes a father she's never met. Like a criminal who wants to prevent others from making his mistakes. Like a family that learned to love more deeply after nearly losing everything. The truth I've learned isn't just about catching people in lies. Sometimes it's about helping them find their way back to who they were before the lying began. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that person is still worth saving."